Hello, everyone. Not sure who's around yet, but just going to keep talking until people show up. I got one person. Hello, person. Let's see who you are. Say hello if you can. Hello, hello, hello. If you're there, send a message in our chat. Just let me know who you are and see if we have all the people that we're hoping to have. Hey, Doug, how's it going? Great to have you here. Man, I cannot believe what a help you were this week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Who else do we have? Yeah, no, seriously, it was good. Who else do we have? Let's see. Anybody else? I see another person in the chat or in the list, not the chat list, but the list. If you're there, say hello. Love to see who's with us today. Vicky. Great to have you, Vicky. Enki Doolittle. Oh, that's funny. Who else? Who else? Who else? Give me a second, guys. I want to do an invitation. Mark. Hey. So on Sunday, good question, Doug. On Sunday, this Sunday, I really want to keep an eye on what our government says and make sure that I'm not like breaking any major rules. But I'm actually pretty sure that the following Sunday will be a good week to get back into it. I would like to try to meet, but don't take this as a promise yet. I really want to watch it and respect respect the authorities and so on and so forth. But um, but I really would like to try to do that again on Sunday morning. I thought it was a lot of fun. It still wasn't the same thing as seeing people in person, but it was, to me, it was a great experience. It was a really wonderful experience. So yeah, so I'd like to try it again, and I got a lot of feedback that day, and I think people were pretty happy with it. Um, so yeah, if we want to try to do sort of the drive-in service again, I guess just stay tuned. I'll be communicating with you guys soon to see what happens. What a weird time it is, hey guys. I mean, it's just such a weird time right now. Hardly know what to make of it. It's so bizarre. Uh, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of anything like this. A whole world sort of shutting down, but I know we were long overdue, I guess you could say, for a pandemic. There's been pandemics in almost every generation of the world, I think, and and I'm actually pretty surprised that we hadn't had one before this. So thank God that we took so much that it took so long to get here. But let's see, yeah. So let's see. We're in Revelation chapter 18. But how did hey Denise, how's it going? Good to have you here. Oh yes, I was going to send a quick message, real quick. One second, guys. I'm going to go to my homepage, and I want to send it to I want to send our homepage to a couple people real quickly. In fact, if you guys want to, um, send the message to somebody and just let them know that we're here and we're meeting. So here we go. 1 second. I'm going to send this to, who am I sending it to? Wow. Alan and, no, not Alan and Jane. There we go. Phil and Jeannie Porter. There we go. Okay. Vicky, I'm interested. If you have a short version of it, feel free to type it in. I'd be interested in seeing that. Let me finish this quick text here. Okay, we're on YouTube tonight. Check out the link. Okay. All right, guys. Yeah, whatever we can do to stay legal, I really would like to do that. I don't want to, forsake our gathering, but I also don't want to break laws. There's such an interesting, balance there. So it's hard to figure out. In fact, I think, I've done a lot of reading about the early history of America, and boy, I mean, there's a lot of answers around that question. So, and they're not always in agreement. So, and a lot of great men think different things. I mean, in the war for independence, there were many pastors on the independence side. People trying to break from their previous government, and we see them as heroes. At the same time, they were defying their government. It's hard to understand. It's a really complex question from a moral, scriptural standpoint. Well, let's get right into it, guys. We're in Revelation chapter 18. Revelation chapter 18. Oh yes, end of Passover. By the way, guys, if you ever want just a good cry, watch the movie Prince of Egypt. On I think it was Thursday, we watched Prince of Egypt at our house here, and it's about the Passover story. It's about the deliverance of Israel from Egypt, and boy, it's a powerful movie. It's really, really beautifully done. I can't remember if it was Spielberg or somebody else, but I think it might have been Spielberg. And so, from a Jewish perspective, and they're very clear about what happened there, and actually somewhat courageous about showing it as it was. And yeah, Kathy, yeah, great movie. That last song, the song about God being our deliverer, is something that gets me choked up every single time. I don't exactly know what it is too, because I can hear the song not attached to the movie, and it won't have the same effect. But if I watch it, by the end of that movie, when you watch it and you see just this moment of deliverance for people, it somehow just speaks so deeply. And I think part of it is that I know that, from a human standpoint, which I am human, I need that deliverance, maybe not the deliverance that they're talking about from Egypt, but the deliverance that it becomes a metaphor for, which is the deliverance from sin and the deliverance from personal failure and so on and so forth. And so it becomes this message that speaks so deeply to me. Yeah, it's a great movie. It's very entertaining. It's it's like a kind of like a Disney movie, but it's also very profound and very deep. Yeah, great movie. I'm sure there are a couple of Hollywood style flaws. Like for instance, at one point there's electrical storm, and you can see as the Israelites walk through the splitting of the water, there's an electrical storm, and you can see in the background whales floating around. I'm pretty sure there are not whales in the Red Sea, but it's a good Hollywood moment. It's pretty good. Anyway, so Revelation chapter 18. I'm actually going to read through the whole chapter here. Right? I think I do. I think I want to do that. Yeah, I'm going to read through the whole chapter. It's a kind of a long chapter, so bear with me. But it's a very powerful chapter, and what I want you to look at as we go is that, how do I say this? It's the utter fall of Babylon. It's the utter end of Babylon. Now, we don't think much about Babylon because we think of it as an old country, sort of an old nation and an old kingdom, and yet it's something that applies to us today. So I think what we have to be doing is watching for what Babylon might mean for us today. Like, are we Babylon? Or is Babylon something else? Is Babylon just an old country? And I think that there are deep roots into the world today, and it speaks in these sort of metaphorical terms into what's really going on with the world today. In fact, you could say that Babylon is more Babylon than it ever has been, I believe. And so you see the idea of Babylon sort of crystallize and become something very real, even though we don't call it Babylon, at least not very often. And yet today we're experiencing what the idea of Babylon was all the way back in the Tower of Babel. So I'm going to read from verse 1 of chapter 18. He says, "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, it's fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she has rendered to you. Repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For her days, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen and am no widow, and I will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. Strong is the Lord God who judges her." I will stop there for now. I will stop there. There's enough to talk about right there, and we can move forward after that. Boy, first of all, I want to be clear about this, that we see this in intense sort of desire of God. Sorry, let me try to adjust this so you guys can see my face a little bit. I feel like I'm just like a shadow. Give me a second here. That's a little bit better, I think. Okay, so so you see this this woman sort of receiving this judgment, and it says, give her double what she gave before, and so on and so forth. Well, I think people could be very uncomfortable with this, because it seems to be that sort of God has set his judgment on this woman, and she's considered a prostitute, and there's a mentality today that is basically that if you, how do I say this? If you express unkindness to a woman, then you're part of this sort of abusive, patriarchal sort of society that the very mentality that she is considered a harlot is derogatory toward her, and so on and so forth. And I really think that that's not the intention here at all. The idea is not to disdain women. The idea is to use the idea of a woman in a metaphor to talk about how humankind worships something, right? We worship something, and our collective worship is often in Scripture um, um, pictured by the relationship between from a woman to a man, a woman to her husband, her protector, her provider. And so the idea here, it's not a statement that all women are sort of evil or something like that. Just it's nothing like that. The idea is that that even the men that are in the category of Babylon are being judged. Okay, so all of us are being judged. Anyone who is a part of this category, shouldn't say us. I mean humankind. All of humankind is judged, but humankind has a relationship to her gods, and as a body of sort of worshipers, then Babylon is referred to as a collected woman in relationship to a husband or not to a husband. So depending on how you see these, depending on who she's in relationship with. Now, we look at the Bride of Christ. The Bride of Christ is also a collective group, including male and female. It's a collective group that worships Christ. And in contrast to that, you have Babylon, the not quite bride of the world, right? It says that the kings of the earth committed fornication with her. And what does that mean? There's something deep going on there. It's a very deep idea. And that is that humankind has a proclivity, a pattern of directing our worship and our dependency upon the kings of the world. And if you boil that down, really, if you boil that idea down, you have a human worship, the bride Babylon, right? The harlot Babylon. You have human worship applied to human authority, and so you have what ultimately is a sort of self-worship. It reminds me so much of the words in the garden where Satan says, "You shall be as gods. You shall be as gods." You will get to a place where you can worship yourself, right? And there's there's more to it than that, obviously, but there's an implication there where we can elevate ourselves to the point, to the position of being like God, and this is a terrible danger that we put ourselves in. But the bride, or the harlot in this case, is human adoration. The beast in the case of these chapters is what the woman has put her affections upon, right? The authority of this world, and so it's human affection directed toward human authority. It's human self worship. Okay, so it says in verse 1, after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen. It's fallen and has become the dwelling place of demons. We're going to get into that whole idea, of demons. But we're talking about the fall of Babylon. We're talking about the failure of the human worship system as it is directed toward human authority. Okay, it's this system where we have elevated ourselves too high, and this system of human worship will fail completely. So I'm going to read a couple of verses here. By the way, there are 5 sort of quintessential passages on the fall of Babylon. There are many passages that also refer to Babylon and its fall, but there are several chapters that refer directly to that. And by the way, I'm seeing some notes here. I'm going to get to them in a second. But Revelation 17 is kind of the fall of Babylon from the heavenly perspective. Revelation 18 is the fall of Babylon, maybe from a earthly perspective, or you could say regarding the economics and authority systems of the earth. And then Isaiah 13 is what some people call Isaiah's little apocalypse. And if you read through that whole chapter, it's almost like the book of Revelation condensed down to one chapter, or maybe it's a couple of chapters, but Isaiah 13 is this really concentrated version of the fall of Babylon. And Isaiah 13 is Jeremiah 50 through 51 is also a chapter about the fall of Babylon, and it's really kind of a warning for people to get out of Babylon. Back to Isaiah 13, it says, in Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and it will never be inhabited. Still to this day, as far as I know, Sodom and Gomorrah are not inhabitable. They were sown with salt by God himself, so they've not been inhabitable. Let me take a look at this. We also feminize nations, which might be John's case here. We speak, for example, of America and as her or she. Yes, absolutely. I would say that, yeah, absolutely. Many times, oftentimes, bodies of people, groups of people are referred to in the feminine, and really, that's not supposed to mean that we're sort of feminizing everything. That's not the idea. And for instance, when we call the church the bride, we're not feminizing the church. What we're doing is that we're affirming our position with God in that we depend on him as a husband. And he has sacrificed himself like a good husband should for his bride. So what we're doing is by identifying, I'll put this in my own terms. Me, when I identify myself with the bride of Christ, I'm not saying that I am a woman, right? I reject that idea wholesale. I believe that God has made me a man through and through, and even though I can be an artist, I've been a poet at different times. Those things are seen as sort of soft side things. At the same time, those things are built into me as a man, and I'm not going to alter those things. And many people do. Many people will take they'll look at themselves as sort of, hey, I'm sort of an artist, and maybe I'm a poet, and so maybe I'm a little bit more effeminate. And then, maybe the big dude kind of guys look at them and say, hey, well, you're not manly enough. You're not like us. You're not just like destroying things, and so you're not very manly. Well, you can really misdefine masculinity by saying that there's no poetry in it, right? Whereas if you look at history, many men have been great poets. Many men have been great artists. God himself is a great poet and artist, and so there's nothing unmasculine about those things. But anyway, going back to it, I don't define myself. I don't define myself as a female by identifying with the bride of Christ. What I do is I affirm the roles of male and female by looking at the difference between Christ and his church. I'm affirming the difference between male and female in doing that. And so I'm actually laying a foundation for an understanding that there is a clear difference between male and female. And thank God for it. I'm really glad that I have a female in my life, and I'm really glad that I get to be a male in my female's life. If that is a really weird way to put it, but it's just the truth. So anyway, I know this is very unwoke. It's not very modern to say this or postmodern to say this, but what can I say? But the church and many nations as well are sort of feminized in this way. And all it is it's saying that we are a group of people that have placed our dependency in something else. And what is that thing that we're placing our dependency in? Well, that's the question. That's the real question of Revelation chapter 18. I want to compare Revelation 18 and Isaiah 13, just so you can kind of see some of the way that these things compare, and so that you can maybe, so I can sort of pique your interest, so that you'll take a look at these two chapters and see the really neat stuff that's here. Revelation 16:10, it says, his kingdom became full of darkness. Isaiah 13:10 says the sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. In Revelation 16:17 says, then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air. Isaiah 13, verse 13 says, therefore I will shake the heavens. So bowl into the air, shaking the heavens. Revelation 16:20, then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Isaiah 13, hold up. My battery is running low, and I don't know why it's not charging. Give me a second. do not want this to run out on us. Okay, sorry. Isaiah 13:13, and the earth will move out of her place. In Revelation 16:20, then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Give me a second, guys. I'm sorry. I don't know why my battery isn't charging, but it's not charging, and I'm for some reason very low. It's sort of on and off. So if I cut out, this is going to be why. I apologize. Isaiah 14. So going through Isaiah 13, it talks about the destruction of Babylon, and it talks about it in very similar terms to Revelation 16. The mountains being moved, the air being darkened, and so on and so forth. So Isaiah 13 is very much a description of the end of Babylon as well. And I just mentioned this because the very next verse after Isaiah 13, Isaiah 14:1, kind of puts a context on it. It says, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will choose Israel and settle them in their own land." So all this stuff that happens, all this destruction that happens for this purpose, because the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will choose Israel and settle them in their own land. The idea there is that God has a purpose beyond just destruction. He doesn't just want to destroy. He has heard their prayers. He's having mercy on their prayers, and he's going to come to them and make sure that they are returned to safety, and thereby prove that he is a faithful God, right? That's his end game, is that he shows his personality, that he is a complete how do I say this? That he is faithful to his word, and he's also showing that he is concerned for the prayers of the oppressed, and Israel has been oppressed by this point. In fact, Israel has been oppressed at almost every point in history. It's only really in America, and this is a great testament to the American system. It's only been in America that Israel has really flourished, America and Israel itself. And so for the first time, this nation that has been so often a horrifyingly enslaved nation has had some freedom here, and I think that's a good thing. Revelation 18:4, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people." That's, by the way, that's Israel specifically. "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, unless you receive of her plagues, for her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquity." God calls Israel and his people out of Babylon. Another verse that talks about that, again, this is from those chapters I mentioned before. Jeremiah 50 says in verse 8, move from the midst of Babylon. Go out of the land of the Chaldeans and be like rams before the flocks. The idea is just get out of there quick, right? Rams can run faster than the rest of sheep, and they sort of lead outward. So the idea is they get out and get out ahead of everyone else, right? That's the idea there. Verse 5, for her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she has rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mix double for her. I'm going to skip down. It says in the middle of verse 7, it says, for she says in her heart, I sit as a queen and am no widow, and I will not see sorrow. Those are some interesting words. First of all, it says that her sins have reached to heaven. This is her sins of oppression. Earlier, it said that her cup is filled with the blood or the wine or the blood of the martyrs, right? So this system of worship of the people on this earth that worship the wrong system have filled up this cup of God's wrath, having abused God's saints. So her sins have reached up to heaven. Usually when something like this is said, sins have reached up to heaven, it's this idea that, in a sense, prayers have reached heaven and need to be addressed. But in some cases, it isn't even prayer that reaches heaven. The abuse itself reaches to heaven. You can see this in the story of Cain and Abel. when Abel when Cain kills Abel, God says the blood of Abel cries out to me, right? So his cries have reached up into heaven. And the sense of that is not necessarily that Abel himself has been praying, but rather the blood itself has been praying, whether or not he had the ability to cry out. So in these cases, these people who have been horribly abused, their death, the justice, the need for justice has risen to heaven, and God has heard that call. And by the way, again, these sins are likely really mostly against Israel, and also against others of God's saints. But a lot of the call to these people is to Israel specifically. Israel, come out of Babylon, get out of the way, essentially. And then she says, I am a queen and no widow. Well, that's an interesting statement. I am a queen and no widow. What does she mean? What does Babylon, what does this system of worship mean when it says, I am a queen and no widow, right? Okay, so first of all, we know that she was a harlot. That's the term used for her, harlot. What does it mean that she is no widow? Wouldn't that imply that she is married? I would argue that in a sense she has substituted marriage for this system of sort of fornicating, right? She has a wrong idea of marriage, and she has been committed to the wrong kind of man, right? So what is the man she's committed to? Well, you see in a later chapter, in a later verse, that it is with the kings of this world that she has committed fornication. So in a sense, she's not married to them. She's with them, but she's not married to them. She's committing fornication. She's in a relationship of perhaps love or dependence, but it's not a committed covenantal relationship. Now, and it sounds like I'm talking about sort of a like a normal human relationship, but think about this. Normal human relationships in Scripture are used as metaphors for sort of large movements in humans, in human ideas. So here you've got this, the body of believers, of those who worship the beast, have falsely thought of themselves as married, and as though that they're not a widow and not a queen, and still a queen. But that's not true, because she's only committing fornication with the kings of this earth. It's not really true. They're in a sort of live-in relationship, but there's no real commitment there. And so we're not talking about individual human beings. We're talking about the way that the world system of worship lives with the system of human authority, and it's a relationship that there's no covenant that's actually stated between us, between the human worshipers of governmental authority and the governmental authority itself. There's no covenantal relationship. There's just a relationship of mutual sort of desire and maybe mutual benefit, but there's no real relationship there. It is only God who has declared a covenant with us, and He has solidified His covenant, and He has lived within that covenant to love us more than Himself, right? That's His covenant, that He will love us to His own detriment, and we see that in Jesus Christ. But we don't see that with the authority system of the world. Why would we? They're beasts. They're not men. They're beasts. That's the whole idea. They don't live as men. They live with a system of fear and force and vain glory, rather than a system of humility and kindness and likeness to God, which is what Jesus does. So she says, I am a queen and no widow. The idea is, hey, my lover, maybe not my husband, but my lover is still alive. Let me see what this says. Matriarch over people's rule, as to placing herself as a god. Verse 7. Oh, yes. Wow, that's a good point. In some way, she thinks of herself as God as well. Yeah, very good point. Kathy, good comment there. I agree. There's a self-worship in this as well. So in some way you see that too. She practices dominion over the beast in the sense that she rides the beast, but also you see that there's a dependency on the beast in that she rides the beast. So is she above the beast? Is she more important or less important? It's really hard to tell, and maybe that's part of the point. We can't tell if the woman thinks of herself as a sort of a god or as a dependent upon God, and maybe this is part of the confusion that comes from not believing in a God and allowing anything to be God, right? And I'll get into that in a little bit too. There's some deep thoughts there, I think. Um, but so I mean, the question is again, what makes this woman a queen in the first place? She thinks of herself as married. She says, "I'm not a widow," but she's not really married. She's committing fornication with the kings of this world. And the idea is that she's in this relationship, and it really isn't a covenantal, self-sacrificing relationship. It's this relationship of mutual benefit, right? Um, and the sad thing is she says, "I will not see sorrow. I will not see sorrow." That's an interesting statement. I will not see sorrow. I want to put it this way: if you can imagine the statement of, say, a high school girl who gets in a relationship with a boy, and they say that girls will make love for the sake of getting love, getting somebody to truly love them, whereas a boy will do the opposite. They will pretend to love in order to make love, in order to enjoy the act, and so in some way, women can enter into relationships in a much more naive way than men do. And in a sense, I think you see this here. Here she is. She's committed herself to the wrong kind of guy, right? She's really committed herself to the wrong kind of guy. This king will not love her as Christ loved the church. He will not be self-sacrificial. He will, in fact, you'll see this. You saw this in the last chapter. You'll see this as we go. But he does not love her self-sacrificially. In fact, eventually he devours her, right? And so she's going into this naively saying, "I will not see sorrow," right? I'm not going to see any sorrow. I'm still a bride, and yet we see her destruction in these chapters. And in the last chapter, it actually says outright that the kings of the world end up killing her themselves. So it would almost garner pity, except that she's also guilty of spilling a lot of blood. So that's not quite full pity. Isaiah 47:8 says this: "Therefore, hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who will dwell securely, who say in your heart, 'I am, and there is no one else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, nor shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come to you in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon you in their fullness because of the multitude of your sorceries and the great abundance of your enchantments." So do you see that? Really kind of what Kathy was saying there. There's a system in which she also thinks of herself as a god. She says in her heart, "I am." That's God's name. "I am, and there is no one else besides me," right? That's God's statement. That's his phrase. So she's taking that on. She says, "I will not sit as a widow." So the idea is that she really believes in herself and in the husband that she's with, and yet she's not a um, she's not a she's not safe. Let me go quickly to verse 7. I want to read this again. Yeah, in that in the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, "I sit as a queen and am no widow, and will not see sorrow." Again, very similar to the words, um, "I will not know loss of children and widowhood." But she says instead, "I am. There is no one else beside me." She really thinks of herself very highly. Again, if you want to look at that reference, that's Isaiah 47, verse 8. Isaiah 47. Um, And she's really misplaced her confidence. Look at the source of her destruction. Revelation 17, this is verses 16 through 17. It says, "And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, and make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled." So in some way, she has taken part of this kingdom, and yet the kings of that kingdom will eventually devour her because they don't want her taking they don't want her taking their place. They don't want her taking their authority and their power. So ultimately, they end up taking control of her. They end up, it says, making her desolate and eating her flesh. Those are pretty intense ideas there, pretty intense phrases. The idea is that the kings of this world like her worship, but they don't want her taking their place, right? Jeremiah 50, 9 through 10. Jeremiah 15, 9 through 10, it says, "For behold, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall array themselves against her, for there she shall be captured. Their arrows shall be like those of an expert warrior. None shall return in vain, and Chaldea shall become plunder. All who plunder her shall be satisfied." By the way, the word Chaldea there, it's just another name for the area of Babylon. In fact, I think Chaldea is the broader area where Babel sat originally. So, yes, Kathy, Jeremiah 50 and 51, fantastic chapters on the fall of Babylon. Absolutely. Jeremiah 50. In fact, that last verse was a Jeremiah 50 verse here. But the idea is the kings themselves will turn on her. This is a terrible thing, but it reminds me of the story. I'm blanking right now on who this was in Scripture. It was one of David's sons, and David's son had fallen in love with one of his sisters, which was kind of terrible already. And he had sort of fallen into this sort of lustful thinking of her, and he ends up, making love with her. It's a very nice way to put it, but he makes love to her and realizes that it says at the end of that he hated her when he was finished doing what he was doing. He hated her. He disdained her. The idea is that he has used her and then just discarded her. He was attracted to her for his own pleasure, but was not there for her well-being. And in some sense, I think this is the relationship of the beast and its bride, the harlot of Babylon. Babylon has given the beast its worship. She's given the beast her worship, and yet the response of the beast is to take from her what he wants and disdain her when he's done. And this is why Jesus is such a great contrast to this story, because Jesus has given of himself and has loved self-sacrificially his bride, and so it's all within a covenant. It's all in the safety of covenant, and so there's this contrast between the beasts and how they treat their bride, the harlot, and how the Lamb has self-sacrificed for his bride. There's a massive contrast between these two things. Goes on with Revelation chapter 18, verse 9. It says, "And the kings of the earth," here it is, "who committed fornication and live luxurious with her, will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense and fragrant oil and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and horses and chariots and bodies and souls of men." Those last verses are pretty intense. because I think what that refers to is slavery, and maybe the unintended slavery that we allow ourselves into by becoming obsessed with the goods of this world. Um, in a sense, we can allow Babylon to buy our souls. And sorry, I'm having an allergic reaction right now, so I might sneeze in a little bit. Just warning you ahead of time. Verse 14, the fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. And the merchants of these things, who became rich by her, will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade in the sea, stood at a distance, and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she was made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. So you see, keep those COVID sneezes away from this computer. No, not Corona. I don't have Corona, guys. As far as I know. I mean, who knows? But I don't think I do. By the way, man, I have to say this. This Corona thing reminds me so much of the Four Horsemen. You remember how there was pestilence, right? One of the horsemen was pestilence. And then I think following that was inflation, where the bread costs a day's wage. Boy, it's profound. It's really profound, because I think what we saw here was pestilence, and then economic fall, right? Economic failure completely. And so, boy, I mean, in what, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, it was, I think, within a week that people saw the problem, and basically maybe within 2 weeks, everything was shut down. And so I think we're getting a taste of what this last couple, what these last days will look like. I think it's going to be very similar. Basically, pestilence will start hitting the world, and the economy will fail because nobody wants to go to work. And by the way, they will depend on government. They will worship the bride. The harlot will worship government, right? So just saying, there's some really, really deep things here, and it's no accident that they show up this way in Scripture, and it's profoundly prophetic that it shows up in Scripture. Should not surprise us because it's the book of prophecy, but boy, it's to a T what's happening. I really do think that we're in the last times, guys. I really do. I've been praying with my kids that they would come to God with seeking His forgiveness, and it's been an interesting conversation to have with my kids, because I think something is really happening, and I'm thankful. I really believe this. I'm thankful that I'm thankful that we are going to be taken by God and not left here. Let's see, verse 20. God shows us how she heard the prophets. That yes, yeah. I'll look at that in a second, Kathy. That's very good. Yeah, verse 20. We'll get into that as well. Let's see. I do want to put these pieces together, though. Okay, so reiterating this, but I want it to be as clear as possible. Okay, the woman, the harlot of Babylon, refers to the worship, human worship, right? Human worship that isn't applied to the groom that is Christ, because if humans are worshiping Christ, they are called the bride of Christ, right? In contrast to that, when the group of believers believes in something besides Christ, they end up being considered the harlot Babylon, and she sets her affections some in some measure upon man. Okay, so we're going to see this. We see the harlot is human religion, or you could say human religious affection, or you could say human dependency. Okay, so it's human dependency, human affection, and the beast in Scripture in these chapters has been authority, right? And the woman rides the beast. So there's this direct relationship between the woman and the beast, and she has set her affection upon the human system of authority, right? Um, and then you see in this also the human economic system. So you have the merchants, the kings, and the harlot, and those refer to human affection and trust, the harlot, human authority and glory, the kings, human economy and dependency, that is the merchants. You see all these things with a very close relationship between them, because you see the merchants and the kings mourning the loss at a distance, but mourning the loss of the woman. Now, what does it mean for the kings to mourn the loss of the woman? What that means is they're sad to see the worship go. They like that worship, right? They want that worship, and yet when it comes to a choice between her and them, they're going to stand at a distance, right? They don't want anything to do with self-sacrifice for her sake. Now, remember, that means us. I should say humans. Humans. It's human authorities that will stand at a distance as humans are left at the wayside and destroyed. It's very important for us to see that we cannot trust human authorities. We can trust them to a certain extent. We can trust that they are placed for good purposes, but they are not God. They are not God. That's the point. Um, so I just have to say this. I'm going to take a dig at something that I might become unpopular for, and but I think that there's some legitimacy to it. I talked about this a little bit last week as well. Um, Humans have a tendency to trust their authorities for things that their authorities are not designed for. We have this tendency, this pattern of trusting them for the wrong things. Um, so I'm going to sort of boil down socialism, and I want you to. Maybe I should preface this by saying I don't dislike the idea of generosity that draws many people to socialism. So I don't want to villainize anybody who is considered a socialist, right? Because a lot of those people are drawn in because they see the sort of sensitivity toward the poor, and they go, "Hey, that's an organized system for uh, it's an organized system for making sure that poor people are taken care of." And there's this very strong draw for kind-hearted people to go that direction. And as a person who's, I would say, what you might refer to as a bleeding heart, not liberal. What's the word for it? I guess a bleeding heart conservative. I get that. I understand that concern for the poor. We should be concerned for the poor. But when you look at how this boils down, okay, socialism, its original terminology, its original name was social Darwinism. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a social Darwinist? The idea was Darwin had introduced that there was no God. I can't remember if it was social Darwinism or social atheism, but I want to say it was Darwinism. Um, Darwin had proposed that there was no God. And that means that if there is no God, then the trust that we've always placed in the church for making sure that there were poor that had alms, right? Alms for the poor. Um, we always trusted the church for that. But if there is no God, there shouldn't be a church. And if there is no God or church, then the poor have to be taken care of in some other way. And ever since Darwinism, socialism has made its rounds. It is hit over and over and over again. And no matter how much it destroys the world and stands back and lets it be destroyed, no matter how often that happens, people still look at it and go, well, but still the poor, the intention is that the poor will be helped. We should love those who like socialism for that reason, but we should not like socialism because it's misplaced worship. That's what it is. It's misplaced worship. So what happens is in socialism, the kings of the earth, those in authority, are given great power, and the people of the earth offer their money to the kings of the earth in dependency, in trust, right? So the harlot trusts the kings, right? So we give our money to the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth are supposed to disseminate the money to everyone else. But we know history over and over again shows us that the kings don't actually do that because they don't love the worshipers. They love themselves. That's how it always works. They don't love the worshipers who are giving them the money. They love themselves and receive the money and may give a little bit out to show that they're doing something. But really, you'll see this, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, always in that system. And in fact, more people get poorer in that system every single time. And so you see the worshipers, the harlot, the bride of the beast, you see them offering their money in worship, in dependency, in hopes that they will receive something from their government, but the government doesn't give back. What's so interesting is it's so much like those verses, I think it's in Isaiah, where God says, I believe it's Isaiah that criticizes the worshipers of idols. He says, you carve one side of the idol, and then you take the other side of the idol and you set it on the fire to heat yourself. You carve and you worship one side, and you're heating yourself with the other side. In other words, your idol is nothing but firewood. And all that made it an idol was the fact that you carved it. You gave it its glory. You gave it its value, its importance. And if it weren't for you and that carving knife, it would have no glory. Well, in our system, we can see this. Maybe not our system specifically, because we're still somewhat free market, somewhat. But in the system of socialism, what we do is we say, government, make sure the poor are saved. Make sure the poor are rescued. And we hand them the money to do it with, right? So what we're doing is we're carving the idol. We're giving it its shape and then glorifying it for the shape that it has. We're giving it its glory, and we're dependent on it for the glory that it has. We gave it that glory. We gave it the money to do that with. Why can't you and I just walk up to somebody who is in need and help them out directly? Why do we need a middleman? I don't understand. I don't know. But we should never disdain the generosity. We should never disdain generosity. That is not my point. What I dislike is the worship of a governmental system that will never love you back the same way, right? It just can't. I'm seeing Isaiah 47 question mark. Did I say something about Isaiah 47? I'm not sure. Oh yeah. Isaiah 47 verse 8. Yeah. I'm going to read that through because you made that comment. It says, therefore, hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who dwell securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, nor shall I know the loss of children. But these two things shall come upon you in one moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon you in their fullness because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments. I really think that that's very similar to the almost always consistent fall of socialistic systems. And it sounds like I'm being political. I don't mean to be. The idea is, what I'm trying to get at is, there is a underlying spiritual problem that we have, and that is that we are willing to create the idols that we worship because we have this desire to worship so deeply ingrained into us that we will worship even if we carve the thing itself. Well, in the same sense, we will do the same thing. We constantly do the same thing to our governments. We 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 carve them, we give them the money, and then we expect to be served by them in the way that we would expect God to be able to take care of us, and we're misapplying our trust. We're misapplying our trust. So and I don't think it's a stretch to think that that's what happens in these chapters. That that human worship has been applied to human governments, and those human governments have failed and have devoured the worshiper, right? The harlot. They have devoured, they have eaten her flesh, they have eaten her up. And because they wanted the glory, they didn't care about really even her worship. They didn't care about her at all, just so long as it brought them glory. And when she is destroyed, they stand at a distance. It's very, very similar. The last people to die in these systems are its leadership. Revelation chapter 18, verse 20. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you upon her. This idea that God has avenged the prophets. This woman has always disdained the system of human worship has always disdained the prophets of God because it calls us a different direction. And it calls us instead to trust God instead of our own human governments. And so the woman hates those prophets. Our sense of self-worship will always hate the idea of worshiping God. So Revelation 18:21. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and he threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus, with violence, the great city Babylon shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more. The voice of a bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth. For by your sorcery all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth." This great millstone, I think, calls us to Jeremiah 51. It says, "Now it shall be," this is Jeremiah 51, verse 63. "Now it shall be, when you have finished reading this book, that you shall tie a stone to it, and shall throw it into the Euphrates. Then you shall say, Thus Babylon shall sink, and not rise from the catastrophe that I will bring upon her, and they shall not be weary." At the time, this was seen as a prophecy of the then current Babylon. They thought that it would be the end of Babylon, and that Babylon itself would never rise again. This was just not true. It says both that it would never rise again and that it would go with violence. But we know from history that Babylon wasn't taken with violence. It was taken secretly. It was taken by intelligence, really. So Babylon did not go by violence, and it did not end utterly. So that prophecy is about the future Babylon, the Babylon that I think we currently live in right now. Let me see. Kathy says, "That's amazing. God not only casts against her because of himself, but for us." Yes, for us. God does this for us on our behalf. And he throws her down as well. God truly never stops showing us his great care for us. This is exactly right. This is exactly right. This is what I mean by taking Isaiah 13, and if you read, it's the mini apocalypse, Isaiah 13, then you read the very next verse, and it says, because the destruction of my people has come up to my ears. In other words, I'm responding to those needs for justice. I'm responding to prayer. I'm responding out of concern. This is not just about destroying. This is about mercy, right? And so God is merciful toward his followers, his prophets, his saints, and he makes sure that their blood is avenged and that they are justified, right? But it says, Um, oh, so going back to that, it says, he says, when you have finished reading this book, this is Jeremiah 51. When you have finished reading this book, you shall tie a stone to it and throw it into the Euphrates. Then you shall say, thus Babylon shall sink and not rise from the catastrophe that I will bring upon her. I think this is a way of God um, sort of putting these two passages together. Remember, I'm going to go back to this. Revelation 18:21. It says, then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found anymore. Then comparing that to Jeremiah 51, you shall tie a stone to it, that is the book, and shall throw it into the Euphrates. Thus you shall say, Babylon shall sink and not rise from the catastrophe that I will bring upon her. So the idea is he wants you to put these chapters together, to put these things together. And so really what Revelation is doing is he's saying, see, this wasn't about the original Babylon. This is about future Babylon. This is about the Babylon that is described as the worship of man for its own authority, right? We trust ourselves, we trust our own authority, and we need to be called out of that in Jeremiah 31 or 51. Then listen to this. I'm going back to Isaiah 13. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms. Sorry, I'm going to give the verse again. And this is Isaiah 13, beginning in verse 19, I think going to 22. Isaiah 13, verse 19. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, nor shall it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabian pitch his tents there. In other words, even those who were sort of nomads won't even venture into Babylon, right? The Arabian will nor will the Arabian pitch his tent there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches shall dwell there, wild goats will caper there, and hyenas will howl in the citadels, and jackals in their pleasant places. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged. So the idea there is interesting. You see, yes, good point. I'm just going to put this out there. Let's see, Isaiah 44 is the one that talks about the way that we will carve our own idols. This is the description, I think, of modern idolatry in socialism. We give it the money that we ask from it. We ask of it. That was a really awkward way to say it, but it doesn't have money. We don't give it, and yet we want from it. Right? It's just a terrible system. But anyway, going back to this, and by the way, thank you for that. It's Isaiah 44, 9 through 20, not Isaiah 47. But going back to this, it says, it talks about these animals. And it's interesting because it looks like the citadels, the palaces, the houses, and the dwelling places are still there. But nobody lives there except these wild animals. It's sort of a ghost town except these wild animals. Now, it's interesting to think about these wild animals. I'll give you another series of verses that talks about this. This is Isaiah 34, 13 through 14. It says, and horns shall come up out of its palaces. Thorns shall come up out of its palaces. Nettles and brambles in its fortresses. It shall be a habitation of jackals, a courtyard for ostriches. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the jackals. And the wild goats shall bleat. Sorry, the wild goat shall bleat to its companion, and the night creature shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. Now, what's interesting is this really may not mean to talk about animals at all. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't get that out correctly, but this may not be meant to speak about animals at all. This is meant to speak, I believe, about demons. Okay, so for instance, I'll give you an example. The night creature. Let me see if I can find that again. Also, the night creature shall rest there and find herself a place of rest. That word there is actually it's the word for Lilith. The word is the old word is Lilith, and you may recognize that from the feminist rock concert series called Lilith Fair. They named that after this demon Lilith that was supposed to be a feminine demon, and so it's this night creature, and it even refers in this chapter. It says in Isaiah 34, she shall find for herself a place of rest. So there's this feminization of this demon. Now, this is again not to demonize females, by the way. Just again, I just want to make this very clear because none of the others are referred to as females. Presumably, they would be, male or female. It doesn't matter. But the idea is he's using a specific word for a demonic spirit known by most to be female. The female is not the necessary part of this. The important part is that we see that he's using this term Lilith, this night creature. This term refers to a demonic creature, and in many cases, these same things, jackals, ostriches, a lot of times they are also used to refer to demonic presence. We give you another. Let's see. The foul spirit in Revelation 18:2, the foul spirit, and we'll get back to those verses in a bit. But the foul spirit, it also presents a similar list and refers also to hairy goats. So there's this connection of demons, foul spirits, and animals again. Okay, that's my point here. So the idea is this is not necessarily about actual physical animals. What it's saying is what Babylon will basically become the dwelling place for demons. It's a ghost town in the worst possible way. Okay, it's just this place for foul spirits, and nothing is really left in it except these foul spirits. And by the way, thorns also, I believe, refer to the Genesis. Thorns in the garden, the failure of man, right? And if you look at this, Revelation chapter 18, verse 2, it says, "He cried with a mighty voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place for demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird." So this idea here is that this place has become a dwelling place for demons, not necessarily animals, but for demons. And the idea is that maybe it's not even fit for animals at this point, okay? Because all these things are sort of subtle reference to foul spirits. In a sense, God has sort of relegated the demonic world into this place, and it's their condemnation to be sort of banished there. I think I want to close this all out by just saying this. We've looked at this sort of destruction of Babylon. In some way, I think that we're not supposed to relish the end of people, right? God does not relish the death of people. However, he does relish justice. And we can see at every point of this book so far that God has been motivated not only to bring a justice against the evil, caused by these people, but specifically the type of evil that is abusive to the innocent, right? So we saw earlier in Revelation, I want to say 6, 4, 6, 5, where the seals were being broken open. I think that's 6. Where the seals were being broken open, we saw that the prayers of the saints were going up before God, and he said, "I won't do this destruction until all your brothers are with us." Well, those brothers were supposed to be the martyred, right? So in other words, God says, essentially, I'm not going to exact justice on this world until all of the injustice has been done, so that it is very clear that I am just in doing what I'm doing. So we see this that God is motivated to do what he does in these books by a sense of justice toward those who are hurt, oppressed, and martyred. And and I think it's very important that we see that, because if we if we if we just see this as God is angry, then we can almost come away from this book as almost like a story about how God sort of loses it and is unable to contain his abuse. That's almost how people can treat this. In fact, there are popular shows out that are about how God sort of how good people sort of prevent the apocalypse. Well, if the apocalypse is the justice of God against evil, against abuse, why do we want to see the apocalypse prevented? God is trying to rectify wrongs with the apocalypse. And so he calls his own people out of that destruction. He calls people throughout Revelation into the safety of his goodness. And a lot of times those people are martyred by the beast and his followers. But all that is to say that God is motivated by justice, and he calls anybody who would want to turn out of the way of that danger, so that by the time he applies his anger, it is only against the abusers and the unjust. So this is a great, glorious movement of kindness and mercy and justice on behalf of those who have been hurt and abused and martyred. I just think that we can really misread this if we're not careful. And I also want to put this in contrast. If you look at this story, again, you saw the beast once in a relationship with the harlot, its sort of bride, in a way of speaking. You saw the beast in this relationship with the harlot, but later on, we know that the beast is the kings of the earth. We see that beast stands at a distance as it's destroyed. And I just want to draw that contrast again between Jesus and the beast. The beast is the one that slays his bride. Jesus is the one that has died. Remember, he was the lamb as though slain. He died for his bride. And there's all the difference you need between the beast and the lamb, right? The lamb is self-sacrificial. He is as one slain, and yet his life is more powerful than even death, right? The life that is inside of him is more powerful than the slaying that he went through. And so his love is powerful. And where the beast promises life and offers death instead, the lamb says, follow me to the cross, but I will give you life instead. And it's just, yes, Kathy, it's a huge difference. There's a massive difference. Yes, the follow-up of chapter 19. By the way, guys, I mean, we saw the pouring out of the bowls in chapter 16, and there's 22 chapters in Revelation. That means there's 6 chapters to go after we see the destruction of Babylon. So you can see even in that the story is not really about how Babylon is destroyed. The story is really about how Babylon is cleansed out of this world. Remember, they're bowls, they're for cleansing. All that is wicked is cleansed out of this world. And that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that God's people and his world is brought back to himself and restored to full beauty. That's how the story ends. So I'm going to read this note. It says, and the follow-up in chapter 19 tells of all of us rejoicing over the destruction. So we will look upon it as a wonderful thing when we get to that point. Absolutely. Why will we see this as a wonderful thing? Not because we're bloodlusting people, but rather because we want to see justice. And we've seen people martyred by the harlot and the beast, and we want to see justice done because of that. Absolutely. It is not because we're gleefully excited about the death of other beings. Not at all. Yeah. Beth says, the life inside Jesus is more powerful than death. This is the gospel in a nutshell. Beth, I trust you to always bring something glorious. Yes, this is the gospel in a nutshell. That the life in Christ is always more powerful than death. This is the gospel. This is absolutely the gospel, because because sin brings death, and the law brings death, and Jesus saves us from both the sin and the law, and He gives us the power to live righteously without the need for a commanding presence over us, right? And so we come to Jesus for that life, and we see in His example that His life is more powerful than death. I love the statement in Princess Bride that says, "Death could not stop true love. All it could do was delay it for a while." Death cannot stop true love. All it can do is delay it for a while. In Jesus's case, it was 3 days. Death delayed true love for 3 days, and then the life of Jesus came back. He delivered Himself from the grave, and so we can see that life is that life is more powerful than death, and life comes from God. And so, yes, absolutely. But Jesus sacrificed Himself for His bride, and calls us, interestingly, to that same sort of self-sacrifice. We need to understand that at the end of that self-sacrifice, He found resurrection, and at the end of our self-sacrifice, we find resurrection. That is the pattern. And so, where Satan offers life and gives death, Jesus calls to the cross and gives life. And in the meantime, while the beast has devoured the harlot, Jesus has given life to the bride. If there is a time in our life where we're faced with the choice of following after the beast or following after Christ, the question on our minds should be, is the beast offering us a true offer, or is he lying to us? And we may experience this sort of martyrdom. It's possible. We may experience some martyrdom. And the question is, will I face this martyrdom? Will I take up my cross and experience life forevermore? Or will I go the way of the beast? Will I receive his promises and receive life for a moment longer and then death? That's our choice. So follow the beast with his promises, or follow the Lamb in his covenants. It's our choice. That's the almost scary thing about it, is it's really our choice. And I hope that we're not like Peter and say, yes, I'll follow you to the death, and then deny. I hope that we're more like maybe Stephen, who just followed Jesus to his death, right? And he saw the glory of God on his throne right there as he was passing away. He saw his eternal life right in front of him. Anyway, guys, thanks for giving me your time, and I hope this has been a blessing. I hope that you can see that while the destruction of Babylon is an intense chapter, it's very intense, at the same time, in contrast, the offer of Christ is glorious and good, and that God is motivated by justice and righteousness. And yes, Kathy, like you, I choose Christ. I hope the rest of us do too. You guys, I'm going to close out with prayer, and then we can be done. Lord, thank you for this chapter. Thank you for showing us the last chapter, or one of the last chapters of this book, that you are going to win this battle, and that this battle is justly motivated, that you are righteous even when you bring destruction, Lord. You are righteous because you are just, and that you are motivated by love for your saints. Lord, I just pray that you would help us to see all those good things. Help us to follow you. Help us understand that you are the one that we need to follow, because not only do you bring victory at the end of all this, but you are good and right. And that's really why we want to follow you. You are just good. And so, Lord, help us to place ourselves in the shadow of the Almighty and seek for your protection. And Lord, where you don't protect us from earthly destruction, help us to understand that you have offered eternal glory and joy. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Enki. Is that short for anything? I'm curious. Enki Doodle. Enki Doodle. That's a good nickname. All right, guys. I don't know if Enki Doodle is on still, but I'm just curious. Is that short for anything? Oh, okay. It's an Indonesian name. Very interesting. I never knew that. Um, that's very fascinating. Uh, by the way, um, Enki Doodle has been communicating with me online a bit. That is Frank from church. Frank was the only one that was outside at the drive up service, so that's who that is. Um, Kathy, I'm happy to be a part of this. I hope if you haven't signed out already, Kathy, I just been praying for you, and I hope that you do well. Um, thank you for being a part of our lives. All right, y'all. I'm going to sign out, and great to talk to you all. And thank you for the comments. Thank you for interacting. Um, Frank, thank you for the verse references. Very good reference there for Isaiah 44. That's a very good reference. Beth, God bless you. Um, Man, I always love your input, and today was no exception. Even though it's very limited because of having to type it all out, uh, I just always love your input. So thank you. Have a good night. All right, y'all. I don't know who else was on here. I know I saw Denise and Doug and Mark. You guys, I hope your night is good. Love you guys. I really, really miss you guys. I can't wait to do another outdoor service. I pray that we can do it soon. I'm going to watch the um, the rules from the government and just make sure that we're honoring them as God calls us to, um, and and hopefully hopefully we can meet again. Doug, good night. All right, guys. Bye bye.